how long this, okay. I may just go, okay. See how that goes. We doing good? Yeah? All right. Okay, well, as you can probably tell, I'm not Pastor Ron, but good morning anyway. If you didn't know, Pastor Ron's been out on vacation. Well, first part wasn't exactly vacation. He was at the General Council of the Assemblies of God, which this church is a part of, and they were discussing new resolutions for our faith movement on things with structure and stuff like that. So he was working and voting on stuff like that. He said, I talked to him a little bit yesterday. He said the messages were wonderful, so praying it was a good time for refreshment for him. Now in the second half, now he's on vacation in Southern California, where I just came from. So he's out there. He's now, if you remember David Nakagami, he's preaching at his church this Sunday over there. So we pray for blessings on him and his family as they take their time of rest. I believe they're staying with Mary's family for a little while to take a little time of vacation this summer. This summer, I did want to tell you a little bit about my class. I'm here for the next 2 months. And so I'll be working the church office for a little bit during the week and leading a Wednesday night class called Prayer Through the Ages. And in this class, we'll be going over certain prayer practices that have come up through the centuries of Christianity, some with some of the saints, St. Ignatius of Loyola, Hildegard of all that. So we're going to go and discuss some of the older saints of the faith and talk about that and some of their prayer practices. And what we'll do is we'll do one practice per one Wednesday service. We'll discuss the history of that practice. We'll pray the practice. We'll talk about the practice and see how to apply it in your life and see if that can be part of your devotional life. And so what we have is sometimes we're so used to the ways we pray. We might pray before we go to sleep. We might try to pray in the car. We might turn on a favorite song. And what this will do is this will discuss some of the older practices we've tried. And I'm getting directed by the sound booth. I need to give up on this. I tried. Well, we tried. So we'll be discussing the different prayer practices, and we'll be trying those together. And so that course will last for about, I believe, 7 weeks. And on the first week of September, we'll be doing our usual praise and prayer. And then we'll be doing those prayer practices. And we'll even be discussing a little bit towards the end of prayer practices of different religions, mainly focusing on Judaism and Islam, a little bit of some of those prayer practices as well. And so what we're doing, we'll be discussing those prayer practices. Those are things that I've learned over there back at school. And I'll tell you, as a worship researcher myself at Fuller, as now a new pastor, and now as a child of God, this is something really interesting to me. So I hope this will be a time of refreshing for you during the classes. So I hope you do get to make it out on those Wednesday nights. But this morning, we'll take a trip back to roughly 3,000 years ago, and we'll be going to 2 Samuel chapter 9. If you're using the NKJV Bible in the pew rack, this text begins on page 274. And so in this account, we read about King David, who is a descendant. We read about King David, who, if you remember in your gospel lineage accounts, he is one of the ancestors of Jesus Christ. And so we're reading about King David. And we see that this is shortly after he's taken rule after King Saul. King Solomon would be his son. King Saul. He's taking rule after King Saul, and now King David is now in power. And so at this point, this is just about where we see him. It's been a couple years now since he's been now the ruler of the united monarchy of Israel, Judah and Israel. And he's just taken over the city of Jerusalem a little while ago, so now he's come now to the strength of his power at this point. And so in this account, we read about King David and a descendant of the previous ruling party, King Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth. So if you're ready, we'll begin at verse 1, and I'll be reading from the New International Version. King David asked, "Is there anyone still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now, if you don't remember who Jonathan was the son of King Saul and was actually the father of Mephibosheth. Now, beginning at verse 2 again. Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David, and David said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "Your servant," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, at Lo-Debar." So King David had brought him from Lo-Debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, "Mephibosheth." "Your servant," he replied. "Don't be afraid." David said to him, "For I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore you to the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant, that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given your master's grandson, everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him, and to bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson will be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servants to do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, because he ate at the king's table, and he was crippled in both feet. This passage already begins with some awfully strange circumstances. The present king is asking a servant if there are any members of the previous ruling party to show kindness to. Now, did you catch that? You have the king asking if there's any surviving members of the previous ruling party. No lineage between the King David and King Saul. But King David is asking, is there anyone left in the house to show kindness to? Kindness to. That's not all that common for someone that's now in a new ruling party and is asking for any living relatives of the old ruling party. So, what's often done is that when a king does ask that question, it's not to show kindness to. When a king is asking that question, if there's anyone left of the previous ruling party's relatives, it's to expunge them, it's to kill them, it's to get rid of them, it's to exile them, it's whatever, but not show kindness to. But that's the question King David asks. Is there anyone left from Saul's household to show kindness to? Just to give you an example, about 3 centuries after King David, there was a king named Ashurbanipal. And when he asked this question, he yielded different results. What he did, when he found out there were rivals of his grandfather, not even him, his grandfather, rivals of his grandfather that were still alive, he mutilated them, he executed them, he cut up their body parts, and fed them to dogs. So, when King David says to Mephibosheth, don't be afraid, you could kind of get why he's saying that. Because that's not all that common for your king to say, I'm going to show kindness to you. It's more common for him to mutilate you, execute you, cut you up, and feed you to dogs. So you could understand why Mephibosheth isn't feeling so good about going to the king's table. I'm thinking that's Ashurbanipal's grandfather's rivals. You can only imagine what inauguration party he had for his own rivals. You don't know. But, you could see that it was that kind of a time that King David was living in. But David is showing compassion and love where it doesn't make any sense. David is under no legal obligation to take care of Mephibosheth. We're living in the United States where you still see our presidents after former presidents still being somewhat taken care of by Secret Service or something like that. This wasn't the case. You have a new ruling party. To the victor belongs the spoils. You get what you got because you're the king, and everyone else, good luck to you. So, out of love, out of his friend Jonathan, and if you're familiar with the narrative between David and Jonathan, they were very, very good friends. And so we see that out of this love for his old friend Jonathan, he's showing love to his son Mephibosheth. And he cares for Mephibosheth as a crippled man. Right, did you catch that too? Mephibosheth is a crippled man. David is going to let a crippled man sit at his table. Is that even allowed? You got to ask the question because, we're living in a different time here. I thank God that we live in an era and day and age now in a country where we do our best to take care of our physically and mentally handicapped, although discrimination and mean jokes and stuff still occurs. But, this wasn't the same day and age that David lived in then. In David's time, being a crippled man meant something completely different as it did today. It puts you with the lowest of the low. And so without even going anywhere except 2 Samuel, no commentaries, nothing else, but just 2 Samuel, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. If you look at 2 Samuel and we go to chapter 4, verse 4, and we go to, if you're using the Pew Bibles, 4 pages back on page 270 in the Pew Bible, we'll find out how Mephibosheth even became this way. This verse picks up right by the death of Mephibosheth's grandfather, King Saul, as well as the death of Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan. And in this verse it reads, Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old. When the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, his nurse picked him up and fled, and as she hurried to leave, he fell, and he became crippled. His name was Mephibosheth. So of no fault of his own, he was a young kid, he was just 5, and he was being carried by the nurse who was so shocked by the news of the father and grandfather dying, she picked up the boy, ran, and dropped him. And that was that. He was a cripple for the rest of his life. Single accident when he was a little boy. As it says right now, from what I read, it didn't really take much because they didn't really have the medicine that we do now. They didn't know how to do the splints. They didn't know how to give him rehab. He just had to fall on his feet hard, and that was bad enough. And that was that. He was a cripple for the rest of his life. So what we see over here was that it was of no fault of Mephibosheth that this happened. And you could see that from this lifestyle that now Mephibosheth has, he doesn't think very highly of himself. I mean, you look at verse 9, or chapter 9, verse 8 in what we just read, and Mephibosheth says, I mean, he calls himself a dead dog. I don't know how low of a spot you got to be in to call yourself a dead dog, but I can't imagine it'd be a very good position. You call yourself a dog, and I don't think that's very good. You call yourself a dead dog, and I think it's really not good. Things are not, Mephibosheth doesn't feel very highly of himself, you can imagine. But to tell you the truth, the society didn't really help much either. They weren't really helping him out. They weren't making him feel good about himself. Things didn't really help. You even go a little further, 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 8, same book, just going a little pages back, describes David's conquest of Jerusalem. After defeating the Jebusites for the territory of Jerusalem, it is said that the victory was so strong that the surviving Jebusites that were left over the taking over Jerusalem were so beaten that the adversaries were made blind and lame. The verse ends with a common saying, I guess I'm trying to think of a nationalist saying, the home of the brave. If I say the home of the brave, you know I'm talking about what country? The United States. So you think of that sort of phrase that gets tagged to a country or a city or something like that. If I say the Big Apple, you think New York City. So these kinds of tags that go to a certain city or a certain place. So think of that same feel that I'm saying over here. The saying for Jerusalem, after David had captured it and all the soldiers were so happy and everything, the saying was, "The blind and the lame shall never enter this palace." That was the saying. So you can see that the society wasn't really helping someone like Mephibosheth that was a lame man. Because if that was a derogatory statement said for a city, and that was the tag of the city, it's not a very good saying to have. I mean, then you think about Mephibosheth now having to walk into the city because he got called in by the king, and he's the deceased, or he's the descendant of a deceased monarch. I wouldn't want to be in Mephibosheth's shoes. This is not a good spot to be in. 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 29, same book again, mentions a curse over Joab's family, saying, "May Joab's house never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food." If it was bad enough to be a curse, you'd imagine it would be bad enough to call yourself a dead dog. You can see where we haven't even gone very far. We've only been in only 9 chapters. In chapter 4 and chapter 5 and chapter 9, we all have this stuff where Mephibosheth has no reason to feel good about himself. He's the son of a dead monarch. His grandfather is gone. He's entitled to nothing because now there's a new ruling party. He's a crippled man, and he's being called by the present king to go into the palace where there's never supposed to be a blind man or a lame man. What are you supposed to think? You're a dead dog. There's nothing for you. You have nothing. You're entitled to nothing. You're an agrarian society. You can't even work the land. There's nothing you can do. And the king has called you in. Has he called you to make you the palace jokester, to everyone to laugh at you? Has he called to humiliate you before he kills you? You have no idea. You just know the king has called you into a city where you feel like you're not even supposed to walk into. And so we see something different. Because David didn't say any of those things. He said, is there anyone left in Saul's house to show kindness to? Which is something completely different. It's so mind-blowing. It's not supposed to happen. The king is not supposed to ask that sort of question. But he does. To David, Mephibosheth is something greater than a dead dog. To David, he makes him a son. Verse 11 says, Mephibosheth was at the David's table like one of the king's sons. That doesn't seem right. You're the grandson of the former king. You're of the former ruling party. So why are you sitting at the king's table? Because the king decided to show kindness to you. That's it. There's no really any sort of big mind-blowing, he earned it, he did anything, he decided he was going to do something for the family, he was nothing. King just said, you're going to sit at my table. And that's it. Mephibosheth didn't have to prove himself or anything. I mean, to show what does it mean to be a king, to be a son, really, just in general terms. We can backtrack before chapter 9, staying in the same book. 2 Samuel, again, tells us a lot about this story. Just in chapter 8, beginning at verse 15, we read an account of sons. And I think this gives us kind of an eye-opening view of what it means to be a son of anyone, whether it was a king or anybody else. Verse 15 reads, in chapter 8, it says, David reigned over all of Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Sariah was secretary. Benaiah, was son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites, and David's sons were royal advisors. So you can kind of get the feel, whether you were the king's son or someone else's son, to be a son meant that you were in a position of honor and power. This power that you had would be bestowed upon you by the father, because the father was the one that had that honor and that power to dispense. If he was the king, he made you royal advisors. If he was over the army, you'd get to rule the army. If he was a recorder, you got to be a recorder. This was the honorable titles that the fathers had, and they were happy and willing to pass that honor and power to their sons. So what does Mephibosheth get? His father's dead. He was 5 when his father died. Okay, maybe his grandfather. Oh no, his grandfather died the same day. What do you get? You're, okay, well maybe you can work the land. Maybe you can kind of stick it out on your own. No, you can't. You're a crippled man. You've been crippled since you were 5. What is there for Mephibosheth? What does he get? He gets nothing. He's entitled to nothing. He can't even earn anything. And then you look at the society that says, we'll take care of you. No, they won't. The society isn't going to take care of Mephibosheth. There's no one to wrap Mephibosheth under their arms. Even his relatives, most of them are dead or gone. They fled the city because there's a new ruling party. So there's no one even to take care of Mephibosheth anymore. What is there left for him? The land that belonged to your grandfather isn't yours. The new party gets it. There's nothing. So it almost like it adds insult to, with the society saying the things that they do, it almost, it adds insult to injury. It's what's for him? But the present king, King David, had something to say about all of this. He says something like, no. I know you're a crippled man, and I know that you feel like a dead dog, but I'm going to make you something else. I'm going to take you, and I'm going to give you back what you thought you lost. The land that belonged to your grandfather and your father, those portions of land, I'm going to give it to you. They're yours now. Now, I know what you're thinking, Mephibosheth. You're a crippled man. You can't do anything about it. But you know what? I'm going to give you Ziba. Ziba's going to take care of everything. And you know what? He's got servants, he's got sons, and they're going to take care of you too. And you know what? Your kid Micah, when you get him, he's going to be taken care of too. Don't worry about a thing. There's no one else that has the power to do that but the king. And the king did it. The king didn't have to do it. The king wasn't required to do it. The government style didn't require the former monarch's descendants to be taken care of. In fact, they were recommended to be killed. That's not what David does. And so when you look at that and you see, okay, so he invited him to the king's table. Well, what does that make him? It makes him a son. because the son sits at the table. The servants bring the food to the table. The other people sit around the palace, take pictures, be tourists, whatever. They don't sit at the table. The king's son sit at the table. So you got Mephibosheth is now the king's son. He's restored. Mephibosheth, who for all intents and purposes probably should have been the next king if the things didn't happen with Saul, he would have been the king's son. He would have been a king himself. He would have been taken care of. But David restores him. David says, you don't have to earn it. I'm just going to give it to you. You get it. It's for free. Here you go. I'm restoring you. It's done. And, I think that there's something for us there in that story. I think there is something big there. Because when you look at that, you look at the story of Mephibosheth, and you say, you've got a person who feels so low and so dead. I think I look at this and I see myself and I see God. I see something where I see God saying, you feel like a dead dog? You're not a dead dog. You're not a dead dog. I made you. I know it. I know what you're about. I know what you've been through. I know you feel crippled. I know you feel like you can't do a thing. That's okay. Come to my table. We're going to go eat. We're going to have some food. I'm going to make you a son. I'm going to make you a son so you sit at my table and you're going to be taken care of. That's what God's got for you this morning. That's what we see in this story. It's something where I got to tell you, I'm urging you to take a seat. Take a seat at the king's table. We see the story and we look at David and we can see almost like an image of Christ who says, I got you covered. Come here. Come here to the table. There is something, though, I do want to make a point of in this story. Before we get a rosy picture that all our lives are going to get all hunky-dory after all this is over and we sit at the table. I want you to take a look at verse 13 in chapter 9. It's the same chapter we've been looking at. Verse 13 reads, And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, because he always ate at the king's table. That city where the blind and the lame aren't supposed to go? Yeah, that one. Yeah, he's sitting in Jerusalem. He's living in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table, and he was crippled in both feet. The chapter ends with Mephibosheth. We don't really hear much more of that, but that is the last description we hear of Mephibosheth. He was crippled in both feet. It's one of the first descriptions we hear about him. It's one of the last descriptions we hear about him. There was no real change to that condition. Mephibosheth, as far as we know, and likely we can conclude, he remained a cripple for the rest of his life. He was dropped by accident at age 5. He died as a crippled man. So, in some sense, there was no change to the condition of being a crippled man, but I'll challenge you because I think there was a change to the condition. Yeah, he remained a crippled man, but he wasn't a disenfranchised crippled man. He wasn't a man who didn't have what he needed. He got to live in Jerusalem, that city where no lame or blind person's supposed to go. He lived there. Oh, he didn't only live there. Did I tell you? He sat at the king table. He lived in the palace. He got to stay with the king. And, that's something that we have to catch there because I can't imagine I get a grin at the thought of thinking of Mephibosheth sitting at the king's table as a crippled person when he's not supposed to have a thing. And everyone's, busting him and saying, you're a crippled man. He says, hey, you have to go home. I live here in the palace. You have to bring the food to me. So laugh all you want, say everything you want to do. You could say that I'm nothing, but I'm at the king's table. You can't do a thing about it. I'm the son of the king. He's made me who I am. And there's nothing you can say, nothing you can do can take me from the king's table because the king says, you're at my table now. That's it. And so today, I'd like to talk to the dead dogs in the room. I think there's some of you that, whether you'd like to admit it or not, may have felt like dead dogs before. Some of you may not like to admit it. I know we live in a day and age that tries to say, I've got it all together, and I know what I'm doing. Thanks. I appreciate it. Good. But I think some of us at some point have felt like dead dogs before, have felt disenfranchised, have felt like, wait, whoa, 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 whoa. This is not how it was supposed to go. I was the son of the person, I'm the grandson of the king. I'm supposed to be the king, right? That's what's supposed to happen. But I'm a crippled man now. I don't have land, I don't have anything. Some of you may be feeling like that. Some of you may have felt like that. Some of you, if you're really honest with yourself, may be feeling that right now. Lots of things are going on with life. We're feeling like we're the dead dogs in the room. We don't have it together. But, you know, there's something special about when you're with the king. The king says, I don't care. I don't care that you feel like you were supposed to have that, and I don't care that you feel disenfranchised, and I don't care that you can't walk. Irrelevant to me. I want you at my table. And you say, but why? I'm a dead dog. I say, I don't care. I don't care. You're going to sit at my table. You are going to sit at my table. Now, what's, you know, the other thing is that, you know, we can kind of wrap in the idea saying, you know, sure, life, you know, may not be what we want it to be. And maybe those of us who may feel like we're already at the king's table may say, hey, you know, life's not perfect. Yeah, okay. Yeah. You're still a crippled person at the table. You're still at the table. And for those of you who feel like you're already at the table, I'm telling you, remember, you're at the table. You might still feel like a crippled person. You look back at your feet and say, I can't do anything with these. And you might say, you look at your hands and say, I can't do anything with this. You look at your head and you're saying, I can't do anything with this. God's saying, that's okay. That's okay. That is okay. You are at the table. And so, for those of you that feel that way, I got to remind you that that's where you are. And don't forget that. You know, you might feel like a nobody, but Mephibosheth, I can tell you, started to feel like a somebody because David said he was a somebody. David said, you're at the table. You're mine. That's it. You are someone because I said you're someone. That's taking the sonship. That's taking the daughtership and saying, you're my father and I'm your son. I am your daughter because you said so. And that's good enough for me. And, you know, I look at this church and I say I'm looking at a bunch of crippled men and women. And that is okay. That is okay. That is okay to not have it all together. That is okay for you not to know what tomorrow brings. That is okay for you not to know what comes next. It is okay for you to feel like you lack in this and you lack in that. It's all okay. It's all fine. You don't need to convince yourself that you need to have it all together. You don't need to convince yourself that if I have this and if I only have that and if I just do nah, don't bother. I mean, you do the best that you can and you live the way that you can. You do the best that you can. But remember, it's not up to you. It's not for you to figure out. It's not for you to figure out what meal comes next. Just sit. Just sit at the table. You know, and so for those of you, I do want to take some time to pray. Those of you who feel that you're not at the table or at the table, I do want to take some time to pray together. So if you would bow your heads, I would like to pray with you now.